The Boring Mysteries for Sleep, The Rose-Filled Cottage Where Miss Wren Quietly Vanished, 2 hours, Section 1. The train had wheezed its final sigh 2 villages ago, and now the rattling cab you hired bumped and sputtered up the narrow lane like it was climbing out of time itself. Out the window, the world blurred into stone walls and flowering hedgerows, sheep grazing with the stubborn stillness of the very old or very sure. You passed a weather-worn sign, "Welcome to Marlow Hollow." The letters were carved into wood and half faded, but charming all the same. The driver, a man with fewer words than teeth, gave a vague wave when you pointed to the fork in the road. "Ashwood Lane," he said, then mumbled something about strangers and that house. He dropped you at the foot of a garden gate twisted with vines. Then he drove off, not unkindly, but quickly. There it was, the cottage, 2 stories of honeystone walls tucked under a mossy slate roof. Ivy clung to it like a memory. Roses, pale and persistent, had taken over the front hedgerow despite it being deep into autumn. A small wooden sign beside the door read, "Rosemere." You liked that, soothing. Inside it smelled of lavender and dust, like someone had lived here once with great care, then left all at once and without ceremony. The air wasn't musty, just still, as though waiting. You made your way through the rooms slowly. The sitting room was cosy, all thick beam ceilings, and a fireplace that asked to be used. The kitchen, quaint and clean. Upstairs, 2 bedrooms, one small and clearly unused, the other with a fade quilt on the bed, and a dressing table that caught the light just so. You felt oddly watched, not unwelcome, just noticed. That night you lit a fire and unpacked in silence, the kind of silence thick enough to hear your own breath. You sipped tea. You listened to the wind press its soft hands against the windows. Somewhere outside, something rustled. You told yourself it was the ivy shifting or the wind nudging loose tiles. You slept eventually and dreamed of roses growing backwards, curling into the earth. Morning came with a hush of fog over the hills. You walked the boundary of your new property. Behind the cottage a tangled garden sloped into a small orchard, twisted apple trees that had gone feral with neglect. A wrought iron bench leaned sideways in the soil like it had grown tired of waiting. At the far edge of the orchard you found a low stone wall. Beyond it, only fields. No neighbours for at least a mile, according to the landlord's letter. The cottage had been vacant for years. Too quiet for most, he'd written. You had thought that sounded perfect. You unpacked your books, your journals, your pens. This was supposed to be time away, time to write, to rest, to escape the mess you'd left behind in the city. But already something tugged at you. Not unease, exactly. More like a story already unfolding, and you'd wandered in mid-sentence. On the 3rd day, while trying to open a stuck drawer in the writing desk upstairs, you found something unexpected. A tiny brass key. It had been taped to the underside of the drawer, like a child hiding treasure. The key was cold and heavy in your palm, old enough to carry a history, but smooth from use. You turned it over in your fingers, then glanced around the room. No obvious locks, nothing to suggest what it might open. But you slipped it into your coat pocket all the same. That afternoon you walked into the village proper, a gentle mile down the lane, where the road narrowed to a single path through rows of cottages, each with its own tangle of flowers and gossip. The shopkeeper, a lean woman with warm eyes and sharp fingers, sold you tea and jam and asked where you were staying. When you said Rosemere, she blinked. "Oh," she said, like you'd mentioned a ghost. You waited, but she didn't explain. Just rang up your things and told you the post came Thursdays, if it came at all. Outside the shop, an older man in a cap nodded at you. "Settled in, have you?" he said. "Strange house, that one." You smiled politely. "Strange how?" He shrugged. "No one stays long. There's that story, of course. The woman who lived there once went missing, just gone." You wanted to ask more, but he tipped his cap and turned away. The breeze smelled of wood smoke and something older. The church bell rang out once, though no service was being held. You looked toward the sound and saw it. The stone church on the hill. Its steeple bent slightly westward, like it had spent centuries listening to the wind. Back at the cottage, you sat by the fire, with a journal open in your lap, and nothing written on the page. The crackling logs gave off a comforting rhythm. You listened to the house breathe. It was a soft house, gentle creaks, whispering floorboards. No menace, but something about that locked drawer and the key in your pocket nagged at you. You couldn't name the feeling, only that it was familiar, like a scent you almost remembered. You tried to sleep early that night, but just before you turned off the lamp, you caught sight of the dressing table mirror. It was angled oddly. You walked over to adjust it, and in the moment your fingers touched the glass, you saw, just behind you, a figure in the garden. You spun around. Nothing. But when you looked again, a single rose had been placed on the window-sill. Fresh, dew-tipped, and no wind. You didn't scream. You didn't panic. You simply picked it up, laid it on the bedside table, and turned out the light. Outside, the wind moved like a memory. Section 2. The morning mist hadn't lifted by the time you stepped out onto the stone path. Your boots damp with dew, and your jacket zipped to the chin. The rose from last night lay exactly where you'd left it, on the table, its petals full and untouched by wilt. You had examined it again in the soft dawn light, and yes, it was real. The stem still green, the scent faint but sharp. No sign of who could have left it, no footprints in the damp grass, just that quiet offering from some invisible hand. The village was beginning to stir. A woman swept her stoop in a neat rhythm, and a dog barked at nothing. The bakery, warm and golden from within, smelled of fresh bread and buttered pastries. You bought a small loaf and lingered outside with your paper-wrapped bundle, feeling eyes on you from behind window panes. Not unfriendly, just watchful. It was there on the green, near a weather-worn bench, that an elderly woman in a lilac cardigan approached you with the sort of ease that comes from having lived in one place too long to fear strangers. "You're the one who's moved into Rosemere," she said. Not a question. You nodded. She smiled thinly. "My name's Edith Harrow. My mother knew the woman who lived there before." You paused. "Miss Wren, is it?" She blinked once, slow. "So, you've heard the name." You nodded again, unsure what story you were being invited into. "She was different," Edith said. "Kept to herself, but kind. Had a fondness for children. Used to read us stories on the green, back when I was barely walking." A soft chuckle. "She vanished, you know. One day there, the next not. No note, no fuss. Just gone." There it was again. That word, vanished. You waited for more, but she only shrugged, as though the ending had been told 100 times already, and lost its sting. "Have you spoken to Mrs. Dell?" she asked suddenly. "She'll know more than I do. She always knows more." Mrs. Dell, as it turned out, ran the village library, a stone building just off the church road, tucked behind a row of hawthorn trees. It had once been a schoolhouse, long before Marlow Hollow forgot how to grow large. Inside it smelled of paper and polish, the warmth of old stories. Mrs. Dell sat at a large desk, stacked with more papers than books, her spectacles perched on her nose as though they had taken up permanent residence. She looked up as you entered and gave a brief smile, tight-lipped, but not unkind. "Rosemere," she said before you could speak. You blinked. Yes. She gestured for you to sit. You did. "Most who come don't stay," she said, rummaging in a drawer. "You look the thoughtful sort, though. You might." From the drawer she produced a thin folder. She opened it, pulling out a photograph, sepia-toned, grainy. A village fete it looked like, smiling faces beneath paper streamers and bunting. And in the centre, unmistakably, stood a woman in a long dress with a rose pinned to her chest. "That's her," Mrs. Dell said. "Miss Clara Wren." You leaned in. Her face was pleasant, framed by dark curls, eyes sharp with the sort of intelligence that made people wary. To her left stood a man, face turned, but where his head should be, a large ink blot had been pressed into the paper. Deliberate, too heavy to be accidental. "Who's—" "No one knows," Mrs. Dell said, sliding the photo back into the folder. "Or no one says. The picture turned up that way. And Miss Wren, well, you'll hear all sorts about her. That she ran away, that she fell, that she was taken." "Taken?" you echoed. "A child's tale," she said, though not convincingly. "She disappeared. That much is true. Summer of 1923. Left no sign. No one ever saw her again. You wanted to ask more, but the air in the library had shifted, grown heavier, as if the past itself disliked being spoken aloud. "I imagine you'll find your own answers," she said. "That house tends to stir things." You thanked her and left, folder in hand, photo burned into memory. The walk back to Rosemere felt longer. The lane seemed narrower. The trees leaned in, their branches whispering over your head, like they too remembered things better left alone. When you reached the gate, you found something new, a small stone placed neatly in the centre of the path. Just a rock, ordinary and round, but it hadn't been there when you left. It was clean too, as if someone had polished it before placing it. You picked it up, turned it over, smooth, cold, and on the underside, carved faintly, a single letter. West. That night, you sat by the fire again. The photograph rested on the side table beside you, that black blot smudged like a wound. You turned it over. No writing, no date, nothing. You thought of Clara Wren, of her rose and her vanishing, and the man someone had tried very hard to erase. Then you remembered the brass key in your pocket. You held it in your palm, heavy and patient. It had been waiting, you realized, for you. The house made no sound but the slow groan of settling timbers. You lit a single candle and climbed the stairs. At the end of the hall was the small guest room, mostly empty, dust dancing in the air. You tried the key in the old wardrobe there. Nothing. Then, on a whim, you knelt beside the wall where the floorboards creaked oddly beneath the rug. You pulled it back, found one board looser than the rest. The key fit. It clicked with the satisfaction of secrets yielding. You lifted the board and found a small tin box. Inside, a faded handkerchief embroidered with roses, a child's broken locket, a single playing card, the Queen of Hearts folded sharply down the centre, and a photograph, not the village fete. This was a portrait. Clara Wren again, this time seated in a high-backed chair, and next to her, clear, sharp, and very much real, stood the same man, tall, narrow of face, wearing a suit that looked somehow too modern for the time, or too old. His eyes were pale and blank. You dropped the photo. It fluttered down like a dead leaf. The house held its breath. Section 3. You didn't sleep that night. Not really. You drifted in and out, wrapped in a blanket on the sofa, fire reduced to glowing coals, the tin box sealed again, and resting on the mantel like a wound you couldn't stop staring at. The portrait, her face serene, his unreadable, stayed imprinted behind your eyelids. Every time you blinked, you saw those eyes. Not menacing, not kind, just empty. By morning, a fine drizzle fell across Marlow Hollow, soft as breath. You wandered the cottage with a strange sort of reverence, touching the surfaces as if they might offer more. The fireplace mantel, the spines of the books left behind, the smudged glass of the window beside the stair. Nothing responded, but everything felt alive. Back upstairs, you stood in the guest room and replaced the floorboard, the key still in your pocket. The loose board didn't protest. It almost welcomed the box back into hiding. Still, you took the photograph with you. The wardrobe sat quiet, doors slightly ajar. You tugged one open, coats moth-eaten and drooping, like relics from a forgotten life, and behind them, to your surprise, a slim drawer, locked. You tried the key, no movement, a different lock, a different secret. Instead, you returned to the main bedroom, letting the quiet of the house settle over you again. You opened the dressing table, brushes, a tiny glass perfume bottle, empty, and in the back corner, a yellowed envelope. Your name wasn't on it, but your hand shook slightly as you opened it. Inside a note, handwritten in tight script. If you found this, then the house has already decided. The roses will show you where to look, but don't ask the wrong question. It's not who, it's when. No signature, no date. The paper smelled faintly of lavender. You read it 3 times before folding it back into the envelope. Something shifted inside you. A quiet click, like tumblers aligning. The house knew. You stood at the window and looked out over the back garden. The rain had let up. The roses glistened under cloudlight. Too many, too early. You hadn't touched them since arriving, but now they seemed to pulse with some silent energy. Stepping into the garden felt like stepping into another time. The air hung heavier here, earthier. The roses were clustered around the southern edge, beside the rusted bench and what might once have been a vegetable bed. You knelt, reaching into the petals of the largest bloom. A thorn pricked your finger, sharp and precise. Blood welled. A single drop struck the soil, and something moved. A patch of earth, looser than the rest, disguised but not perfectly. You began to dig, slow, careful handfuls of dark soil, inch by inch, until your fingers hit something solid. Wood. You brushed it clear, a small rotting crate, inside wrapped in waxed linen, another tin box, newer than the first, locked again. The brass key fit. Inside papers, pages of a journal, written in a different hand than the note upstairs. Feminine, precise, urgent. You sat on the bench and began to read. June 2nd, 1923. He came again last night. I heard him in the garden. Not footsteps, not exactly, a presence, watching. I pretended to sleep, but the roses moved like they were breathing. June 9th. Mrs. Dell says I'm imagining things, that it's grief or nerves, but the Queen of Hearts turned up in my drawer again. That card means something to him. June 16th. I buried the box today. If anyone finds it, if you find it, please believe me. I was followed, not by a man, but by time wearing a man's face. You stopped reading. The air had changed, heavier, not threatening, just more aware. The sound of the wind through the orchard was a whisper now, curling through the trees like an old song. You thought you heard your name. You shook it off. Back inside, you spread the pages out on the table and smoothed them flat. They weren't complete. Entries skipped, some damaged by damp, others faded beyond legibility. But the story they told was unmistakable. Clara Wren had not disappeared in a fit of drama or despair. She had been watching something watching her in return, and she had tried desperately to leave a trail. The Queen of Hearts, the roses, and this feeling that time itself had blurred around her. You opened the photograph again, looked at the man, and then, slowly, you turned to the mirror. Just a glance, nothing there. But when you looked again, something flickered. Not a person, not a shape, just a sense, as if something stood behind your reflection, waiting to be seen. You closed the mirror, picked up the journal pages, replaced them in the box, and that's when you noticed the third tin, not in the crate, not in the wardrobe, sitting calmly on the floor by your bedroom door, as though it had always been there. You hadn't put it there. You approached slowly, lifted the lid. Inside, a single object, the Queen of Hearts, folded once down the centre, edges frayed with time, the same as the one in the buried box. Or was it? You held it like it might vanish. The air in the room hummed. You turned in a slow circle. No one there, no sound, no movement, and yet the sense remained. A presence, watching, waiting, not cruel, not kind, just old, older than the cottage, older than Marlow Hollow. You placed the card back in the box, closed the lid. The fire popped behind you. You jumped. When you turned, the chair near the hearth was no longer empty. The card sat there now, again, folded. You didn't speak, you didn't move, you just watched. And somewhere beneath the floorboards, the house gave a long, contented sigh. Section 4. The next day arrived with grey skies, and a hush so complete it felt intentional. No bird song, no breeze. Even the trees stood still, as if the world had paused to hear your next move. You woke slowly, as though surfacing from deep water. The card, the Queen of Hearts, still lay on the armchair where you'd last seen it. You hadn't touched it. You weren't sure you wanted to. After breakfast, you returned to the library. Mrs. Dell was there, precisely as before, glasses perched, papers in small piles of chaos that only she seemed able to navigate. She looked up when you walked in and tilted her head slightly. You found something. It wasn't a question. You nodded, then hesitated. What do you know about Miss Wren's disappearance? Mrs. Dell removed her glasses and set them down slowly. I know she wasn't the first to go, she said, but she was the last. After her it stopped. You blinked. Stopped. Whatever it was that kept taking people, she said. We don't talk about it anymore. Not really. It's better not to wake things. But someone must remember, you said. I do, she replied, but memory isn't always a gift. She stood and moved to a tall filing cabinet, one that looked as old as the stone church. After a moment of rummaging, she returned with a thin journal bound in fraying red cloth. She used to borrow books weekly, Mrs. Dell said, but in 1923 she stopped coming, except once, in June, her last check-out. She flipped to a page and tapped it with one long finger. Book of English Folklore, she said, and this, she turned the page, this is the return date. There wasn't one. She never brought it back, Mrs. Dell said softly, and neither has anyone else. You asked if the book had been replaced, catalogued, found. She shook her head. No record of it past that entry. It's as if it disappeared with her. You left with more questions than answers, and returned to the cottage with the journal echoing in your mind. What could Clara have read that last month? What had she seen in those pages? The roses greeted you silently as you walked past, their petals heavy with yesterday's rain. You didn't like how some of them turned toward you as you passed, like they were leaning in to listen. You entered the cottage and felt it immediately, air displaced like someone had just left the room before you entered. The photograph was gone. You froze, scanning every surface. The tin box still sat on the mantel. the journal pages beside it, but the photo of Clara and the man with the pale eyes gone. You moved through the house slowly, methodically, upstairs, downstairs, no sign, but something else caught your attention. A faint smell, lavender and paper and something sharper, ink. It led you to the study. You hadn't used the desk in the corner yet. It had seemed too old, too stiff, more a piece of set dressing than furniture. But now something sat on its surface, the missing photograph, and beside it a new page, handwritten, but not in your hand. He is not a man, he never was. He wears their faces because it makes us slow to run. The card is his mark. If you see it, you're already part of it. He comes through where time is weakest, where memory holds strongest. You stared at the page for a long time. Then you turned it over. On the back, a drawing, crude, pencil on age paper. But the shape was unmistakable. A tree, your orchard, the one near the bent bench, and something buried beneath it. That evening you returned to the orchard. The sun sank behind clouds, washing everything in silver grey. You brought a spade this time. The same spot where you'd found the buried tin now seemed deeper somehow, as though the soil had sagged in on itself, or something below had stirred. You began to dig. The soil gave way more easily than expected. Soft, loose, like it remembered your hands. Within minutes, your spade struck something. Wood, again. But not a crate, a book, bound in deep red cloth, damp at the edges but still intact, gilt lettering nearly worn away, the book of English folklore. You pulled it free, heart thudding hard, opened it. Inside, pressed between the pages like a warning, was another Queen of Hearts. Not folded this time, pristine, and beneath it, in Clara's handwriting, he finds the ones who remember. He cannot bear to be forgotten. You didn't sleep that night either. Instead, you read. The book was filled with legends, some whimsical, some dark, black dogs, haunted wells, time slips, pages upon pages of English folk belief stretching back centuries. And then, tucked in a chapter titled The Watchers Beneath the Green, was a paragraph circled in faded pencil. It is said that where roses bloom out of season, the boundary between now and then is thin. A watcher may emerge from the fold in time, wearing borrowed flesh. Those marked by the Queen shall see him. Those who turn away shall forget. And those who ask when shall begin to understand. The language was old, tangled, but clear enough. He wasn't a ghost, not quite, not a spirit or a man. Something in between, a ripple in time drawn to places where memory refused to die. You placed the book on the table, gently. It felt warm, or maybe your hands were just cold. You didn't move for a long while, just sat, listening, to the silence, to the weight of the cottage as it settled around you, to the whisper of roses pressing against the window. He doesn't knock. You remembered that now. He waits until you open the door. Section 5. You didn't open the door. Not that night, not even to look out the window. Instead, you paced, from the study to the kitchen, from the kitchen to the hearth, from the hearth to the dressing table upstairs, where the first note had been left. You checked every lock, every latch, every drawer, like it mattered, like it might make a difference. The Queen of Hearts sat now on your writing desk, uncreased, crisp, watching, or marking. You weren't sure any more which. Come morning, the mist was back, thicker than before. You could barely see the hedgerow through the white veil. The cottage felt like it had been moved somewhere else overnight. Not farther away, just elsewhere. You made tea, ate nothing. Then you went outside, into the garden again, this time not to dig, this time to see. The roses had multiplied, not in a slow natural sprawl. They had burst outward, blooming where bare soil had been yesterday, their colour deeper now, almost bruised, and they were all turned in the same direction, toward the southern wall of the orchard. The air there was different, warmer somehow, charged, the kind of shift you might feel when a summer storm was about to break. Only this storm felt still. You followed their gaze. Beyond the orchard's edge, through a thin break in the hedgerow, was a narrow path you'd somehow never seen before. No overgrowth, no bramble, just soft earth and a trail of pale rose petals. You hesitated, then stepped forward. The path led you downhill, not steeply, but enough that your ears popped gently as you walked. You weren't sure how long the descent took. Time had begun to blur at the edges, but eventually the trees cleared and you stepped into a small hollow. At its centre stood a garden, perfectly round, encircled by a low stone wall covered in moss, and in the centre a sundial. Only it didn't mark hours. The face bore no numbers, just symbols, a heart, a crescent moon, an eye, a rose, and at the centre, instead of a gnomon, stood a rusted blade of iron driven into the stone like a stake, carved into the base, barely legible. To turn is to return is to begin. You circled it once, slowly. The silence here was complete, sacred. Then you noticed the bench, old wood, warped with age, but on it sat another envelope, this one sealed in red wax, a rose imprint. You opened it. If you are here, then he knows your name. Speak nothing, write everything. Memory is the only anchor. Lose that, and you will follow her. You looked around. No sign of anyone, no footsteps, but the roses here, white, not red, began to sway, though there was no wind. You left the hollow in a daze, the envelope still in your hand. The walk back felt shorter. The path behind you, when you looked over your shoulder, was gone. Back in the cottage, you did as the note commanded. You wrote everything, from the first day to the present hour, the photograph, the card, the journal, the book, the sundial, the garden, the whispering wind and the silent man, and the eyes in the mirror. You wrote until your hand ached and your vision blurred, and then you kept writing. When you finally looked up, dusk had fallen, and sitting on the table beside your journal was another card. Not the Queen of Hearts, a blank one, plain white, untouched, but for a single ink line running from corner to corner, a fold waiting to happen. You didn't touch it. Instead, you walked to the mirror in the hallway. This time you didn't see yourself. You saw the orchard, as it looked in the photograph, not how it looked now, untamed and overgrown, but neatly kept, rose-trimmed, grass even, a white dress at the edge of frame. You leaned closer. The figure turned. Clara Wren. She looked at you, not through you, at you, and for a moment the mirror wavered, like water disturbed. Then she mouthed a word. You couldn't hear it, but you knew what it was. Remember. The mirror cleared. Your reflection returned. You stepped back, breath short, heart hammering. You turned to check the garden, the orchard, all the same. But when you stepped outside, the roses were gone, all of them, just empty stems and raw dirt. The silence was deeper now, heavier, like something had been removed, or something was waiting to arrive. You went back inside. The card was folded, no longer blank. Now it bore a single mark, the eye, drawn in thick black ink. Watching. You picked it up, turned it over. Clara's handwriting again. He's closing in. You lit every lamp in the house. You didn't know what good it would do, but you couldn't stand the shadows any more. And then, behind you, 3 soft knocks, not on the door, on the mirror. Section 6. You froze. The mirror didn't move again. No cracking glass, no sound beyond the soft creak of the floorboard beneath your own feet. But you knew what you'd heard. It hadn't been imagination or the wind playing games. 3 distinct knocks, gentle, patient. You didn't go to it, not right away. Instead, you sat on the edge of the hearth, firelight flickering over your hands. You let the warmth crawl into your skin while your mind tried to anchor itself to something solid. Logic, reason, anything. But nothing came. You couldn't ignore the mirror forever. So, slowly, you rose, crossed the sitting room, stood before it. Your reflection stared back, tense, pale, jaw tight, but alone. You waited. No knock, no flicker, no Clara, just you. Still, something in the air had changed again, heavier, charged. You could feel it pressing against the walls of the cottage, coiling into corners. Not malevolent, not exactly, but waiting. You turned away and went upstairs, back to the guest room, back to the locked drawer in the old wardrobe. The brass key hadn't worked before, but this time, when you slipped it into the keyhole, it turned. The lock clicked open like it had never resisted you. Inside, a leather-bound book. No title, no markings. You opened it. The first page simply read, Clara Wren, 1923, personal account. You turned the page. It's not a haunting, she had written. It's a tether. This place, this house. It doesn't let go. It remembers period. I've tried to leave 3 times. Each time I find myself back at the garden gate, even when I walk the road for hours, even when I close my eyes and try to wake up. This morning I wrote a letter to my sister. When I came back an hour later, the page was blank again. He is erasing me, not killing, not harming, just removing. But I'll leave pieces too deep for him to reach. Roots, that's what stories are, aren't they? Anchors in time. You swallowed hard, turned another page. More entries, some mundane, meals, village errands, weather, but they began to thin, grow panicked, shorter, more frantic. The roses are blooming again. Wrong season, they weren't there yesterday. Mrs. Dell doesn't remember me. I saw her in town. She blinked and asked if I was new. I'm unravelling. The last entry was barely a line. He came to the mirror. He asked nothing, just watched. You closed the book, hands trembling. You looked around the wardrobe's interior. Tucked into the back corner was a scarf, soft, pale blue, still smelling faintly of perfume. You lifted it, half expecting something to crawl out. Nothing, but underneath it a matchbox. You opened it. Inside ashes, and the faint remains of a Queen of Hearts, burnt, torn, only the crown and heart still visible. You sat on the floor, book in your lap, box in your hand. Clara had fought back. Somehow, even as she disappeared, she left pieces he hadn't been able to erase. You placed the scarf in your pocket, took the book, and went back downstairs. Set it beside your journal, your words, your own anchor. You added another page. You wrote everything about the knocks on the mirror, the new book, the scarf, the matchbox. You signed your name. Then you closed the journal and locked it in the drawer of the writing desk. That one didn't need a key. It had always locked fine, but this time you pulled the brass key from your pocket and left it resting on top. A quiet statement. You weren't going anywhere. That night, you sat by the window and watched the orchard. Nothing moved, but the stars above it seemed just slightly out of alignment. Just slightly older. You brought The mirror downstairs, placed it in the kitchen, covered it with a cloth. It didn't protest. You slept on the sofa again, but your dreams weren't yours. You saw Clara standing in the hollow with the sundial. She was barefoot, pale. She looked tired, but calm. She pointed to the centre of the dial, where the blade rose from stone. When you looked down, your own hand rested on it, and from the blade's edge blood welled. Yours. You woke before the pain reached you. The mirror was uncovered, the cloth folded beside it. Your reflection blinked with you, moved with you. It was only you. But in the corner, just for a second, you thought you saw something behind your shoulder. A figure, gone when you turned. You didn't scream. You just whispered, "Not yet." The day passed in silence. You didn't write, you didn't read, you waited. Late in the afternoon, you lit a fire again. The roses still hadn't returned. The orchard stood still. The sky hovered between storm and stillness. Then the knock came again. Not from the mirror. From upstairs, 3 times, steady, confident. The house held its breath. And so did you. Section 7. You climbed the stairs with deliberate slowness, each step soft but final. You didn't carry a candle. You didn't call out. If something had come to visit, it already knew you were there. The knock had come from the small bedroom, the one where Clara's wardrobe sat open, where the hidden book had waited behind a locked drawer for nearly a century. You paused just outside the door, hand hovering near the frame. The silence on the other side felt tilted, not quite still, like a breath being held too long. You pushed the door open. The room was empty, of people at least, but on the windowsill, carefully laid out, was another Queen of Hearts, this one different, worn, aged nearly to transparency, the edges curled with time as though it had been left in sunlight for years. Ink faded, but there was no mistaking it, folded sharply down the centre. Beside it a white rose, no stem, just the bloom, perfectly preserved. You stepped forward and picked them up, slowly, held them both in one hand. The rose was cool and dry, the card nearly weightless. You turned in time to catch your reflection in the dressing-table mirror. Your face, just your face, but in the reflection, the wardrobe door behind you was closed. You turned, it was open. You turned back to the mirror. Now your reflection had shifted, not entirely, still your clothes, still your posture, but not your eyes. They weren't yours, they were his, pale, unmoving, staring back without blinking. You stepped away fast, stumbled slightly. The card fluttered from your hand. The rose landed soundlessly. You didn't touch them again. You didn't go near the mirror either. Instead, you backed out of the room, down the hallway, and into the master bedroom. You locked the door behind you, even though you weren't sure it would matter. You sat on the bed and forced your breath to slow. Then you noticed the journal on the nightstand. Not Clara's, yours. You hadn't brought it up here. Still, there it sat, open to the last page you'd written. And underneath your handwriting, a new line had been added. He sees you. You didn't write it, but it was your pen, your ink, your script. You tore the page out, crumpled it, tossed it into the fireplace, and watched it blacken, curl, disappear. Then you did something Clara hadn't done. You wrote a new page, fresh ink, firm hand. I see him too. You signed your name again, dated it, closed the journal. This time, when you opened the door and stepped back into the hallway, the house didn't creak. It felt still, not waiting, not pressing, just still. Downstairs, the air smelled faintly of burnt paper, And lavender, always lavender. You made tea. It was a stupid thing to do, but it gave your hands something to occupy. You sat at the kitchen table, the covered mirror just behind you. You didn't lift the cloth. You didn't need to. Instead, you stared at the fireplace, letting your mind wander, trying to find the thread that still hadn't quite woven together. The card, the rose, the mirror. Time, that was the key, wasn't it? It wasn't about ghosts or hauntings. Not really. It was something stranger. The rules bent around Marlow Hollow, around Rosemere, around you. You weren't just witnessing history, you were entering it. Or it was entering you. Later, in the orchard, you found the bent bench had been righted, stood upright, clean of moss and rot. Someone had wiped it down. On the seat, carved with neat care, were the initials C.W. below them, a small, almost childlike heart. You ran your fingers across the etching. It hadn't been there yesterday. The Queen of Hearts, Clara Wren, the hearts everywhere. But why? What was the connection? You thought about the folklore entry. He cannot bear to be forgotten. And suddenly it clicked. The Queen wasn't his symbol. It was hers, her resistance, her anchor. Every time the card reappeared, it wasn't a threat. It was a reminder of her memory, of her refusal to vanish. He erased people by unwinding their presence, slicing through time, not with blades, but with absence. But Clara had fought to stay, not with fists, with paper, with ink, with remembrance, and now so were you. You sat on the bench until the air grew cold, until the first stars winked through the trees, sharp and still. You wrote her name on your palm in pen. Clara Wren. You said it aloud. The wind picked up immediately. Not harsh, not violent, just enough to lift the petals that had fallen from the hedges. They rose into the air and spiraled around you, then scattered. A thank you. That night, you left the mirror uncovered. You sat across from it, watched yourself, watched him when he arrived, because you knew he would. It was time. And just before midnight, your reflection blinked, but you didn't. The face looked up, and he smiled. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't kind. Just recognition. You reached forward and touched the glass, and it was cold as winter stone. Section 8. You don't remember falling asleep. One moment you were staring into the mirror, palm pressed to its surface, cold biting into your fingertips, and the next, your head was resting on the arm of the sofa, the fire reduced to an orange glow, the mirror dark as a pond at night. You sat up slowly. The cottage was unchanged, everything where you'd left it, but the air held a weight, like a door had been left ajar somewhere behind the skin of the world. On the table beside the cold teacup was a fresh sheet of paper, crisp, no creases. It read, "He came to me when I was 7. I gave him a name and he gave me silence, but silence grows teeth." Sigu, you didn't remember writing it, but it was your handwriting again. You touched the ink. It was dry. You folded the page and placed it inside your journal. Carefully, gently, like it was an artifact, not yours to alter. That morning, you sought out Mr. Penley. You hadn't seen him since your arrival. But if Clara had written of him, Mrs. Dell says, "I'm imagining things," but the Queen turned up again. Then maybe the old gardener might remember what others had forgotten. The churchyard was as good a place to start as any. You found him tending to the hedge, lining the west wall, humming to himself an off-kilter tune that made the hairs on your arm stand up for no good reason. He looked up as you approached, gave a short nod, eyes sharp despite his age. "You're the one in Rosemere," he said. You nodded. I'm looking for Clara Wren. That got his attention. He stood up straight, wiped his hands on his trousers, and studied you like a man sizing up weather. You've seen her, then? It wasn't a question. In the mirror, you said, and in dreams, her journals, her cards. His eyes softened. Still leaving them, is she? You blinked. You knew about the cards. He chuckled, dry as dead leaves. Knew. She gave me my first one, told me to keep it close if I ever got lost. Did it work? He looked out toward the orchard. For a time. You followed his gaze, then asked, What happened to her, really? He was silent a long moment. Then, she saw something no one else dared to. Not just in the house, in the land. This village, it's caught in a knot, a fold. Time runs through it like threads through cloth. Some days I wake up and it's 30 years ago. That sounds impossible, you said, but not unkindly. He shrugged. So does memory, but it still happens. He turned and began walking. You followed. He led you beyond the churchyard, past a rusting gate and into the woods. The path was barely there, but he walked it like a man who'd made it himself. There's a place, he said, where the roses bloom year-round, white ones. Clara used to call it the centre. You stopped short. I've been there. He looked back at you, brow lifted. The sundial, you said, with no hours. He nodded. That's the one. Not many see it. Fewer still remember they did. I wrote it down, you said. That's the trick, he said. Writing it, remembering, not just in your head, in your hands, in paper. He can erase what's forgotten, but not what's recorded. You walked in silence for a while longer until you reached a clearing. Not the sundial garden, a different one, smaller, walled with stacked stone, half collapsed. At its centre stood a statue, weathered, chipped. It was Clara, or what was left of her image. No plaque, no inscription. Just her face, looking off into the distance, one hand outstretched. She built this place, he said, with her words. Every time she told someone, every time she wrote it down, she was carving it into the world. And then she disappeared. She moved, he said. Sideways, that's what she called it. You frowned. She said he couldn't take you fully if someone still remembered you. So she stepped out, just enough to stay ahead of him. You looked up at the statue. Moss grew in the creases around the eyes, but even now she looked like she knew something you didn't. She left me a message, you said, in the mirror, just one word. He smiled. Let me guess. Remember, period. You nodded. He reached into his coat and handed you a small bundle of yellowed paper tied with string. Clara gave this to me, he said, told me to pass it along when the time came, said I'd know. You took it. What's in it? His smile faded. Instructions. You returned to Rosemere as the sky began to dim, bundle clutched tight in your hand. You didn't open it on the walk. You didn't stop once. When you stepped through the gate, the air inside the garden felt different again, lighter somehow. The roses were still gone, but the stems had begun to green again. Inside, the house welcomed you like it had been holding its breath. The fire was already lit. You didn't question it. You sat at the table, untied the string, and opened the first page. To whoever holds this, if you're reading, you've seen him. You've been marked. That's not the end. That's the beginning. Section 9. You read through Clara's pages slowly, afraid to miss even a single line. Her handwriting was steady, measured. The words carried a calm urgency. No panic, no dread, just precision. These weren't ramblings. They were instructions. He doesn't feed on fear. He feeds on absence. The moment you stop remembering, he starts erasing. Your name fades. Your face fades. Your place in time becomes a seam he pulls loose. The next few pages were more detailed. Diagrams, symbols, sketches of the sundial, the rose garden, even your cottage, seen from above, as if she'd floated above the roof and drawn it down to paper. There were notes in the margins, looping arrows and underlined warnings. Don't speak to him, not in mirrors, not in dreams. Writing is safe, writing binds. Fire is safe, fire clears period. You turn the last page. My grave isn't where they think it is. There is no grave. That's how I stayed. He has many faces. One is a child, one is a priest, one is you. You lowered the paper, let the silence return. Outside the orchard was still. You watched it through the window, dusk bleeding into the sky behind the trees. The stars hadn't come out yet. The air felt stalled, like the world was holding its breath again. Then you heard it. Bells, not church bells, not wind chimes. These were smaller, older, a high distant peal, like a handbell from a long-forgotten ceremony. You stepped out into the garden. The sound grew louder. Drawn to the source, you passed the bare rose stems and entered the orchard. The sound surrounded you, but you saw no one. The moon had risen, thin and high. Then you saw the light, a faint shimmer like moonlight on water, rippling near the far wall where the stone boundary met a crooked apple tree. You moved toward it and walked into a memory. The tree straightened. The grass grew short and neat. The orchard became ordered. You weren't in your own time anymore. Children laughed in the distance. A woman called out, Clara's voice, unmistakable. You turned toward it, but no one was there. The sundial appeared again, though it didn't belong here. It rose out of the orchard like it had been buried and forgotten. The markings shimmered, the heart, the crescent, the rose, the eye. Then the blade turned. No hands moved it, no wind, just a silent tick, like a clock you hadn't realized was counting down. And then you saw him, not in full, not face to face, but his shadow moving between the trees. Not tall, not short, not distinct in any way you could describe, but real point A, fold in space, a disruption in logic. He didn't move like a man. He slid, and he saw you. No chase, no drama. He just looked, and with that look, something inside you shifted. Your name, your sense of now, wavered for a moment, like a wire plucked in a silent room. You staggered back, clutched the scarf in your pocket, whispered your name, said it again, louder. He stopped moving. You reached into your coat, pulled the journal out, and held it up. The page with Clara's writing, the warning, the anchoring. You opened to it, let the moonlight touch it. The shimmer flickered. The trees twitched. He turned and vanished. You ran back to the house. The roses were back, all of them, in full bloom, pale blushing white, glowing faintly in the moonlight. Inside the mirror was uncovered again. But this time Clara stood in it. She wasn't ghostly, not flickering, just there. She nodded once, then pointed. To the hallway. You turned. There, beside the staircase, the wallpaper had peeled back. Beneath it, a panel of wood unlike the rest of the wall. You approached, touched it. It gave way with a soft groan. Behind it, a passage. You ducked inside, carrying the journal, heart hammering. The tunnel was narrow and low, sloping downward into the earth beneath the house. You followed it without question now. Instinct carried you forward, past old roots and cobwebs, the journal clenched tightly in your hand. Eventually, it opened into a circular chamber. At the centre, a pool of still water, ringed with stones. Above it, etched into the low ceiling. This is where the stories are stored, and along the wall, in hundreds of tiny slots, Cards, every one of them, the Queen of Hearts, names scribbled across the backs, dates, places. Most were unreadable with age, but one stood out, sharp and fresh. Your name. And a date, tomorrow. You stepped back, looked around the chamber, then dipped your hand into the pool. It was freezing, but clear, and when you looked down through the surface, you saw pages, floating, turning, all the stories he'd tried to take. But they were still here. Clara's voice echoed faintly in your ears, though no one spoke. As long as someone remembers, you remain. You left the chamber, closed the panel behind you. When you returned to the hallway, the mirror was empty again, and the card with your name on it sat on the stair. You picked it up, and with steady hands burned it. The flame caught quickly, the ink curled, the card vanished in a curl of grey smoke. You stood very still. The house creaked once, then went quiet. Section 10. You slept through the night for the first time in weeks. No dreams, no visions, no shadows in mirrors or whispers in the orchard. Just quiet, unbroken sleep, and when you woke, the sun was already creeping in through the cracks in the curtains, golden and warm. You rose slowly, half expecting something to be wrong, tilted, erased, but everything was exactly as it should be. The journal sat on the desk. Your cup still held yesterday's tea stain. The roses outside were still blooming, pale and heavy with dew, and on the table where you'd burned the card there was a single petal, white, untouched. You touched it, expecting it to dissolve into ash. It didn't. You made tea. You moved through the house, testing the edges. You checked the mirror, just yourself. No movement, no flicker. You even walked into the garden, out past the hedgerow, and stood in the orchard at full morning light. No shimmer, no folding space, just bird song and wind. And yet, something was different. Not wrong, not dangerous, just missing dot. Later, you opened the floorboard in the guest room again. More from curiosity than anything else, the tin box was still there. You opened it, all contents intact, the scarf, the folded playing card, the broken locket. But there was something new beneath them, a letter. You unfolded it with care. The paper was crisp, fresh. To the one who followed, "You've done what I couldn't, not because I wasn't strong, but because the story wasn't ready to end yet. That's what we are, you and I, anchors for what must be remembered. He can only erase the forgotten. But you wrote it down, you put it in ink, and now it lives again. My time is no longer caught in his grip, and neither is yours. When you leave, do not look back. Not because he's waiting, but because I'm not. Thank you. Clara." You folded the letter and held it against your chest, and for the first time since you arrived, you cried, not out of fear or grief or fatigue, but from release. Something had lifted. The weight behind the walls, the echo in the halls, the wrongness in the reflections. It was gone, not exorcised, not destroyed, just dissolved, unwritten. You spent the afternoon with the journal, not adding anything, just reading, rereading, tracing back through your own words, confirming what had happened, confirming you had happened, because that was what he did, wasn't it? He erased the shape you left in the world. But not any more, not this time. You packed slowly that evening, not because you were eager to leave, far from it, but because you knew it was time. The cottage had served its purpose. The walls no longer watched. The silence no longer listened. Still, you left the journal behind, placed it in the drawer of the writing desk, locked it, and left the brass key on top. You left Clara's scarf draped over the mirror, and you left the mirror uncovered. because now it was just glass, just reflection, just light. The next morning you closed the garden gate behind you and stood for a long while on the lane. The cottage crouched behind you, sleepy and timeless. Then you turned and did not look back, not even once, because this time you didn't need to. Section 11. You didn't return to the city right away. Instead, you took a room at the inn just beyond Marlow Hollow, a place where the roads were wider and time didn't curl in on itself. The innkeeper had never heard of Clara Wren, didn't know the name Rosemere, said something vague about fog and farmland when you asked about the orchard. That was fine. You needed the distance. For 3 days you didn't write a word. You walked the hills instead, sat in fields that didn't remember you, breathed in air that hadn't passed through ancient gardens, and let your mind settle into the idea that you were now the only one who remembered. Until the 4th morning, when you opened your bag and found the Queen of Hearts again. You froze, but this one was different. No fold, no faded edge, no inked name. Just the card, clean, whole, untouched, and underneath it a slip of paper, a single sentence in a fine, neat script. It's not for him anymore, it's for you. You held the card a long time before slipping it back into your notebook. Not as a warning, not as a curse, as a reminder. You went back to Marlow Hollow that afternoon, just to walk, just to see. The village hadn't changed. Mrs. Dell was at the library, humming to herself, filing returns. When you walked in, she looked up and smiled. Back so soon? You blinked. You remember me? She tilted her head. Of course I do, dear. You were staying out on Ashwood Lane. That old place. What's it called again? You opened your mouth, paused, then smiled. Rosemere. That's the one, she said, nodding. Charming little house. You left the library with a strange warmth. She remembered. No blank stares, no polite confusion, just memory. You passed Mr. Penley near the baker's. He tipped his hat and said nothing. That was all right. He'd said enough. You didn't go back to the cottage. You didn't need to. You knew it was there, but it wasn't yours anymore. It was resting. It had let go. Back at the inn, you sat with your notebook and wrote. Not about him, about her. Clara, what she saw, what she did, what she saved. Not as a warning tale, not as a ghost story, as history, the real kind, the quiet kind, where someone brave chooses not to scream or run, but to stay, to observe, to remember. You wrote late into the night, tea growing cold at your elbow, stars winking into view one by one outside your window. And when you were done, you didn't sign it. You just wrote, "This is where the story lives now." Then you closed the book and slept. No knocking, no watching, no queen, just silence and stars. Section 12. You didn't expect the village fair. You hadn't noticed the signs going up, hadn't heard the casual planning chatter between locals. But when you walked into the green that morning, it was already underway. Booze and bunting, the scent of fried dough and spiced cider in the air, children running barefoot on grass, ribbons tangled in their hair, dogs barking at nothing in particular. You stood at the edge for a while, just watching. The fair felt untouched, like it could have been from any year in the past century. No phones, no loudspeakers, just laughter, old songs played on worn fiddles, and the shuffling rhythm of old-time dancing on makeshift wooden stages. You walked past the pie contest, waved off the invitation to guess the weight of a squash, and ended up near the maypole, tall, white-painted, crowned with a wreath of flowers that looked suspiciously like Clara's roses. Children danced in circles, winding the ribbons, giggling as they wove in and out. Parents stood by, smiling, some clapping in rhythm. And then, as if a string snapped quietly beneath the scene, the light changed, only for a moment. You blinked. The shadows were different. The sun slightly shifted. The breeze had stopped. The children kept dancing, and then one of them, small, sharp-eyed, no older than 6, stepped into the third ring. No one noticed, no one except you. He paused, mid-spin, turned to look at you, and smiled, not eerily, not possessed, just a knowing smile. He stepped back into the dance, and the moment passed. The light returned. The shadows realigned. Parents clapped. The band struck up a new tune. Everything moved forward again, unaware. You didn't breathe until the dance ended and the children scattered. You waited for the boy to reappear. You didn't see him. You circled the field, checked behind booths, near the lemonade stand, by the hedgerow where children were building a den from sticks and old blankets. Nothing. Then you turned, and he was beside you, just standing there, watching. You looked down. He looked up. Same smile, same stillness. Before you could speak, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a card. Folded, slightly torn. You didn't take it. He pressed it into your palm anyway, with both hands. Then he whispered, "She said thank you," and walked away. No one stopped him. No one called after him. You turned to look again, and he was gone. Not hidden, not blurred, just gone. You unfolded the card slowly. It was the Queen of Hearts, but not Clara's. This one was older, rougher. The ink was smudged, as if water had kissed the surface and tried to carry the lines away. On the back, in the same careful script from the underground chamber, just 2 words, "Keep going." That night, you returned to the inn, not shaken, not haunted, but tasked. You laid the card on the windowsill, didn't burn it, didn't hide it. You let it be seen. You let yourself be seen. Because that was the difference now, wasn't it? He wasn't watching you. You were watching him. You sat by the small desk in your room and opened a fresh notebook. Not the old one, a new beginning. You wrote down the boy's face, the maypole, the shift in light, the card, his voice. She said thank you. And beneath that, someone still walks the third ring. Someone still remembers. You wrote until your hand cramped. Then you closed the book and left it open on the desk. When you looked in the mirror that night, it was only your reflection, but the space around you didn't feel empty. It felt expectant, and it was then you realized something crucial. The boy hadn't returned with him. The boy had returned with her. A new echo, a new tether, not a mark, a signal. Section 13. You left the fair behind the next morning. You walked without aim, past the lanes of Marlow Hollow, through open fields where the grass whispered over your boots. The notebook lay in your coat pocket, spine still warm from your hand. The Queen of Hearts card was tucked inside its pages. This time you didn't carry it like a shield. You carried it like a key. The sky was overcast by the time you reached the church again. You found yourself walking toward the old vicarage, a place you hadn't visited yet. You weren't sure why now, just that something in the weight of the morning seemed to pull you there. The door was open, not wide, just cracked enough to let in a draught and a whisper of incense. Inside the hall was narrow and dim. You followed the scent of smoke and old stone into the back study, where you found the vicar seated by the fire, eyes closed, hands folded as if in silent prayer. He didn't open his eyes when you entered. "I was wondering when you'd come," he said, voice soft but certain. You sat across from him, no words needed. He reached into a drawer beside his chair and pulled out a small bundle, worn cloth bound with wax twine. He handed it to you. She gave me this the day she vanished, he said, told me to keep it until someone returned who remembered. You untied it. Inside a single page torn from a hymnal, with verses blacked out in ink until only 5 words remained. I was here the whole time. Beneath it, a pressed rose faded to parchment white, and under that, a name, not Clara's, yours. You looked up sharply. He nodded. She said you'd be part of it, that stories always fold back, that what we lose in time we recover in memory. You opened your mouth, then closed it again. What was there to say? He continued. Clara didn't vanish, not in the way they think. She stepped aside, chose to exist outside the line so he couldn't pull her thread loose. You believe that? You asked, finally. He smiled. I watched her do it. You didn't ask how. You didn't need to. Some truths didn't require proof. They were woven deeper than facts. And this village, this vicar, this room, none of them were untouched by time. She told me, he said, that one day someone would come and unbury her name, not resurrect her, not save her, just witness her. You handed the cloth bundle back. He shook his head. Number, it's yours now. You nodded once, tucked it into your coat, and stood. Do you want to know what she called him? He asked, just as you reached the door. You paused. She never used his name, he said, but she had a word, the folded one. You turned back. He folds time, folds memory, folds people, not like paper, like cloth, so they disappear into the seams, into the hidden creases. And the Queen? You asked. She was the thread she used to keep herself from being folded. He could crease the card, but he couldn't tear it. You left without speaking again? It was enough. That afternoon, back at the inn, you laid the pressed rose onto a blank page of your notebook, taped it gently with thin strips of linen. Then you wrote beneath it, I am not folded, I am not erased, I am here. You closed the book, took a walk. When you reached the edge of Marlow Hollow, you turned to the path that wound away from the village, the one not marked on maps, the one no one used, the one Clara once took. You didn't walk far, just enough to say you had. And in that place, where the trees arched into a silent cathedral, and the air hummed with old names, you placed the card, folded, face down. You pressed it to the earth with a stone, not to hide it, to anchor it. Then you whispered her name one last time, Clara Wren, and turned back toward the road. You didn't expect the mirror to be waiting when you returned to your room, but there it was, propped against the wardrobe where no mirror had been that morning. You approached. Your reflection looked back. Only you. But in the far corners of the glass, barely visible, white roses bloomed in slow motion. And just behind your shoulder, for the briefest moment, a woman in a pale blue scarf, smiling, then gone. Section 14. The mirror was gone by morning. No trace it had ever stood there, no scratches on the floor, no streaks on the glass. Just the wall, bare and quiet, and the wardrobe door swung slightly open, as if nudged by a dream. You didn't bother asking the innkeeper about it. You already knew what the answer would be. Instead, you sat at the desk with your notebook and began your final entry. Not a retelling, not an explanation, a closing. You wrote slowly, deliberately, It isn't over, it never was, but it's quieter now. He doesn't follow, he waits, and when no one walks his path, he slips between folds, looking for a seam to pull. But every word is a stitch. Every name remembered is a knot he can't undo. You stopped, staring at the last line. Then you added one more. And I am full of names. The notebook was nearly full now. It felt heavy in your hands, like a life lived, not just yours, Clara's, the boys', Mr. Penley's, every forgotten footnote re-stitched into the fabric. You took a walk through the orchard one final time. The path had grown less tangled, as though the trees themselves had shifted to make way. The bench stood where it always had, straight and sound. The initials CW were still there, but beneath them someone had added another set. Yours, smaller, neater, not carved, written in ink. You didn't bring a pen with you. The sundial appeared when you looked up, not suddenly, not dramatically, just present, as if it had never left. The blade was gone. In its place, a rose stem, thornless, bent gently where the metal had stood. The symbols on the dial were brighter, not glowing, just fresh, preserved. You circled it once, then sat in the grass beside it, laid the notebook on your lap, and whispered a few lines aloud. Clara's lines. Speak nothing. Write everything. Memory is the only anchor. Lose that, and you will follow her. You closed your eyes, let the orchard breathe around you, and in the stillness something changed. The weight of the past lifted, not vanished, but rebalanced, no longer pressing, no longer hunting, just present, acknowledged. When you opened your eyes again, the sundial was gone. The orchard was just an orchard. Birds chirped, leaves rustled, time moved forward. You stood, walked back slowly. At the garden gate, you stopped and turned. For the first time since arriving in Marlow Hollow, the cottage didn't feel like it held anything back. It looked simple, clean, settled. You stepped inside. The floors didn't groan beneath you. The air was light. You could smell bread from the neighbour's window and a faint trace of rain in the wind. On the desk, one final object rested where the journal had once sat. A blank card, unfolded, untouched, no name. You picked it up, looked at both sides, and then wrote a single word on it. Stay? You placed it back on the desk and left the house. This time you locked the door behind you, not as a ward, but as a gesture, respect, the kind you offer to places that have finally finished speaking. On the path into the village, you passed a young girl picking daisies by the road. She looked up and smiled. You nodded, kept walking, then heard her hum a tune under her breath. You paused. It was the same melody Clara's music box had played, the one you'd never written down, the one you hadn't heard since your first week in the cottage. You turned, but she was already skipping away. You said nothing. You just watched. Then you walked into the village one last time. Section 15. The village felt softer now, like something old had exhaled. The colours were richer, the brick a deeper red, the grass a cleaner green, the air touched with sunlight and the low hum of bees. You wandered through it like a guest at a familiar home. Not a resident any more, not a stranger either, just someone passing through with eyes open. The bakery door was open. The smell of cinnamon floated out and tangled with the laughter of someone inside. Mrs. Dell passed you on the green, her arms full of books, and she nodded at you like you'd always been part of the backdrop. Going on then? She asked, a smile tucked behind her words. I think so. You'll be back. It wasn't a question. She carried on. You sat on the same bench where you'd first heard Clara's name spoken like a half-forgotten spell. The children were playing by the maypole again, this time with careful steps. None of them crossed into the third ring, but they looked at it, like they knew, in some deep instinctual way, that certain spaces weren't empty just because they looked that way. A boy looked over at you, a different boy, not the one from before. He had a feather tucked into his cap and a stone in his hand. He tossed it once, caught it, then wandered back into the dance, and for a moment everything shimmered again. Not time, memory, the kind that doesn't fade, the kind that gets stronger each time it's remembered, retold, rewritten. You reached into your coat and touched the notebook, the one that now held more lives than yours, more truth than you could explain to anyone who hadn't walked this path. You didn't need to explain it. You just needed to remember. That was enough. That had always been enough. You rose, walked the length of the green, past the vicarage again, the church bells silent this time, resting. And when you reached the road that curved gently out of Marlow Hollow, you stopped, turned, and looked one final time. The village didn't wave, it didn't call out, but it saw you, and you saw it, not just the buildings, not just the people, the story, and the spaces between the story, where people like Clara still lingered, where roses bloomed through stone, where the folded one slipped back into shadows, waiting for someone else to forget. But this time there would be books, and names, and anchors. You took one step forward, then another, then vanished gently into the mist, the card with the word "stay" left behind like a key turned softly in a final lock. Word count 1059. Wind down 300 words. The night is quiet now. No footsteps, no mirrors, no cards resting on mantels or tucked under doors. Just the hush of sleep settling over fields and hedgerows, over ink and story, and the final exhale of a memory made whole. You're safe. The house is quiet behind you. It knows you. It thanks you. The path ahead is smooth, your boots light on packed dirt, the sky above stretching wide and pale. You can feel the weight of the journal in your pocket, but it's a welcome one, like a hand resting gently on your back, saying, "You were here." The wind is soft. It carries no warnings now, only the scent of roses and the warmth of an ending well earned. There are no more puzzles, no riddles and reflections. The folded one has gone quiet, not defeated but displaced. You've robbed him of what he needed most, forgetfulness, and in its place you left memory. Sharp, clear, alive. You'll sleep now. Your hands have done their work. Your voice has spoken. Your presence, your remembering, has left a mark. Let the story fade to black. Let the sound of the fire crackle beneath your breathing. Let your breath grow slower. Let your shoulders drop, your thoughts unravel. Let the last light dim gently from the sky as you rest. You are remembered. You are unwritten only when you choose to be. And now you choose stillness. You choose sleep. You choose peace. End of script. Sweet dreams.